Hello, everyone, and welcome to February 2025's February's Ask the Expert. I was first Ask the Expert for February because we actually have two this month. So this is the first one this month. This is the liver transplant panel. My name's Mark Chatterley. I work for PSC Support. If you've interacted with the charity, you might see my name pop up every now and then. We also have Martine Walmsley in the background. She'll be keeping an eye on the questions that you can submit through the Q&A feature, which should be a button along the bottom of your screen. You can send a question, we'll see them, and we can put them to the panel. This is a bit of a new test for us at PSC Support. Usually our Ask the Expert webinars have a presentation and then a question and answer section. We're trying something new and having a more of a discussion-based panel, which is why there's more people on your screen that you can see. I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment because it's better than me doing it and putting words in their mouth, and I don't want to get any of their job titles wrong because some of them are quite long and varied. So hopefully this works well. Please submit your questions as we go. I will say at the beginning that we won't be able to offer any personalized medical advice because we don't know your individual situations. We'll be talking about things in general, but yes, don't let that put you off asking questions. I shall let people introduce themselves first. Should we go with, let's go with Katie first.
Hi everyone, so my name's Katie Ramos. I currently work at the University Hospitals in Plymouth, where I'm an advanced clinical practitioner in hepatology, and I focus my work on the liver transplant patients. So I've worked in liver transplant for too many years now, I think. With the realisation, I think it was 25 years now that I've worked in liver transplant, so a long time. And essentially I look after people right from the point they're referred for assessment for transplant, throughout their transplant assessment process, through the listing, and then post-transplant as well. So it's a really privileged role to work in, as I get to see people sort of throughout their transplant journey and into wellness in the future. Often see their children growing as well, so that's a real privilege.
And you have the title of transplant coordinator as well, is that correct? Or is that
because we are one of the satellite centres? I don't technically call myself transplant coordinator, because I'm not bringing patients in for transplant currently, because we don't do the transplants, but essentially do all the work that's involved with coordinating the care of liver transplant recipients.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us. If we jump across to Dr. Ferguson.
Hi there. My name is James Ferguson. I'm a consultant in Birmingham. I work in the liver unit in Birmingham, and I have an interest in PSC and liver transplantation.
And then finally, we have Keith.
Hello, I'm Keith Anderson. I was the treasurer of PSC Support for 12 years until last year. I'm happily retired now. I've handed that over to Mark. Just a brief rundown of my history. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis 50 years ago, 1975. 20 years after that, I was diagnosed with PSC. And another 8 years after that, I had a transplant at Leeds. That was 2003. I was told after my transplant I would have only lived for a few more months without it. And there's no great surprise to me because I knew I was going downhill. It's 21 years ago, and for me, my transplant's been a fantastic success. It's given me 21 years of good health, allowed me to see my two lovely granddaughters, aged 11 and 14, who I would never have seen without my transplant, because I'd have been 6 feet under when they were born. And I'm just so grateful for everything that's been done for me. Grateful to my donors and her family for donating the liver, and to all the medical people that have looked after me over the years. I'm so grateful, and every day is a bonus. That's the way I look at it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. If you're getting some hearts floating up on the screen there, that coming from the people listening. I will say that the discussion is mainly going to be from you three lovely panelists. I might chip in every now and then. I'm also an ex-PSC patient. I had a transplant 18, 19 months ago. I feel like, because it's like that point where I need to stop counting it in months and move to years, but it's not quite there yet. It's like that weird age that babies have. So I'm getting there. So my experiences might be a little bit different to Keith's, but so if so, I might chip in. So please forgive me for doing that. It's not just an ego thing. It's a little bit of an ego thing. I also want to say, just before we move on to the first question, that it isn't inevitable if you've got PSC that you will end up needing a transplant. It's less than half the people who have PSC end up with a transplant, but obviously it's still something we like to talk about as the charity. So I just wanted to get that out of the way in case anyone was getting worried that this will happen. It's still less than half do. So if we start off with an initial question, I think it's a good one to start off with. It's probably Dr. Ferguson can start this one off on this one, which is at what stage should someone with PSC be considered for a transplant?
I think the first thing to say, and what we try and encourage people, is to be referred early for transplant assessment. Even if you go through a transplant assessment and the team thinks it's a bit early, that's always better than the other way around. You know, referring late is obviously a bad thing for all sorts of reasons. So we try and think at an early stage. And what makes us think about it in patients? Well, if someone's got cirrhosis and portal hypertension and has problems related to that, fluid in their tummy, ascites, or they've had a bleed or encephalopathy, confusion. So if they've got complications related to portal hypertension, we would think about it, but that's less common as an indication in patients with PSC. We often think about if people have a fixed high bilirubin and there's nothing we can do about it, we can't stent, or there's no therapies for that situation. And the other time we tend to think about it is when people are really struggling with recurrent episodes of biliary infection or cholangitis and are coming in and out of hospital, needing lots of IV antibiotics, and that's another situation that we consider it.
Excellent. Is that your experience too, Katie, with the patients that come to you?
Absolutely. And like James says, in PSC particularly, the complications from portal hypertension tend to be less evident. And so that perhaps is often a bit of a later sign of the disease progression. And I think it's always difficult with PSC to get the timing right. So like James says, it's really important that we think about things early in order to ensure that people are well enough to get to transplant.
Makes sense. Keith, you mentioned in your introduction that you were quite ill when you had your transplant. You only had I think you said 3 months. They said you had left to live, which is a terrifying thing to be told. Do you feel that you were quite ill when you went through the assessment, or did you have to wait a long time while you were on the list?
No. Well, I only waited 3 months, which is amazing, really. I was on the list back in 2003, and very briefly, if you remember, that was the time when George Best, the footballer, had his liver transplant, and then he started drinking again after his transplant. And that's when I was on the waiting list. And I remember I went to a pre-transplant clinic one Wednesday afternoon. I was talking to one of the consultants, just asking him how long I was likely to have to wait, because I knew then I was going downhill. And he said, well, he said, to be perfectly honest, he said, since the news about George Best starting to drink again has got out, there's hardly any livers becoming available at all. He said, people just aren't donating, because of the common misconception that if you need a liver transplant, you've been drinking too much. And obviously, PSC has nothing at all to do with that. So I left that Wednesday afternoon feeling quite despondent because I knew I was going downhill. And he said, the chances of you getting a transplant in the foreseeable future are very remote. And what happened, I don't know, but 4 days later, just gone 11 o'clock on a Sunday night, the phone went and it was Leeds to say they'd got a liver. Amazing. So,
That's
so that saved
incredible.
my life. Yeah. So it went from the Wednesday being told that there was no prospects in the immediate future of anything until getting the call on the Sunday night, and that's when I had the call. But as far as my symptoms were concerned, I'd been transferred to Leeds from my local hospital at the beginning of 2003. I had very bad itching. I lost many hours sleep because of that. Leeds managed to stop it with rifampicin, but they said it was only temporary. They said as your liver deteriorates, it will return, the itch, and we won't be able to do anything about it. Then the usual things, fatigue. I was 49 at the time, but to be honest, I remember saying several times I felt more like 94 than 49. I kept going, but it was a heck of a struggle, and it was just sheer determination, really. I had varices in my throat. They had to keep being banded on a regular basis. Jaundice, I lost an awful lot of weight, and generally I was just getting weaker. I knew I was going downhill.
So
So
it was very much a welcome thing to happen then, because that's quite a high symptom burden to have. So my journey, like I said, I was going to throw it in. It was a little bit different. I was referred for transplant for the first time a long time ago, 2011. I actually referred to Dr. Ferguson here. I don't know if you remember me coming in.
yes,
And I went through the assessment process, and ultimately it was concluded that it was too early for me. And so very conflicting emotions about that, and I still somewhat have some conflicting emotions about that. But I eventually didn't go back on. I didn't get added to the list until 2020. And then I had quite a long wait on the list, which we could discuss maybe waiting times later if someone asks about it. But also, I was added in March 2020, and the lockdown started like a week after I was added. So my experience there is very unique. But no, that's a very important point. You also raised a point about the stigma around transplant as well, that people have this view that it is only alcohol related and that you've brought it on yourself. It's definitely something I've encountered, like my neighbors asking me which drug it was that caused the damage. And so it's quite shocking. And I imagine that's something Katie might have had to have dealt with before, that to have to deal with patients who are facing some sort of stigma, or does that not appear at the medical side of things?
Absolutely. I think, there's a great deal of stigma in all aspects of healthcare, actually. And it doesn't just sort of pertain to alcohol. When we think about the fact, for example, a lot of liver disease today is caused by metabolic associated liver disease, which is to do with obesity and other metabolic risk factors. So there is an awful lot of stigma, particularly in hepatology. And equally, I think it's important not as a liver patient not to stigmatize other people with liver disease, because ultimately, although it must be very, very challenging when you have an autoimmune driven disease and you see that patients with other lifestyle induced liver diseases are being transplanted, etc. I think no one goes out with the intent of needing a liver transplant.
That's right.
And there are various diseases with addiction, etc., that no one really chooses that. So, and I think there is a lot of stigma in our society for various things. So, always being kind is an important message.
I think, everyone should just be kind.
Sorry?
Everyone just needs to be kinder, I think.
It's true.
It is easy to say that, particularly when you're struggling with severe ill health yourself. I appreciate that must be very challenging. So.
A bit of selfishly, I mentioned that my wait was quite a long wait. Maybe Dr. Ferguson or maybe Katie can jump in on this. But how long? One of the questions we did get sent in was how long should someone with PSC be expected to wait? I know the system doesn't work like a waiting list where you just knock people off. But do you have a grasp on kind of average waiting times, maybe at all?
Did you want to answer?
Either one of you can jump in.
Katie, you go first, and then I'll Okay.
So first of all, I would say average waiting times, I think, is a really challenging and difficult concept, because if you are told, oh, I'd expect you to wait about 6 to 9 months, 10 to 12 months, and then you exceed that, it's very challenging. So I think with the current allocation system as it is, I think it's much more practical to think in terms of there is a great deal of uncertainty with how long someone is likely to wait. We do know that patients with PSC are perhaps struggling more with the national allocation system as it stands, the transplant benefit score, and there's a variety of reasons for that. And as you alluded to earlier, Mark, you were at a meeting last week or the week before, which is looking to review the transplant benefit score and the national allocation system to ensure that some of the more poorly served patient groups that's reflected in the scoring system. And I think that's important to acknowledge as well, that's a sort of iterative process, it's being reviewed, and that's really important, that we continue to do that. And that actually the donation via the allocation via the national offering system only really accounts for about half of the donors currently offered at the moment. So there is some more individual unit-to-unit practices regarding the offering of DCD donors. So yeah, I think it just varies massively, and having a approximate number, I think, is potentially more challenging than helpful.
Yeah, I mean, yes, Katie makes lots of good points there, and I agree. The average isn't particularly helpful, because I think what happens with the national allocation scheme is quite a lot of people get transplanted very quickly. So if you're very sick, according to the scheme, you will get done within the first couple of months. And we can tell that when we're assessing people in the meeting. We look at their transplant benefit score, and we can tell that they're going to be done very fast. And then there's another group of people who wait quite a long time. So an average isn't helpful. I think it's reasonable for people to ask what their score is and what that might mean. And we do try and talk about that when we're assessing people, but also in the waiting list clinic. But Katie's completely right. A definite number is probably unhelpful for everyone, because it just is unrealistic. But yeah, I think that's the main thing just to take away, is that there's a group that try to get transplanted very fast because they're unwell, and there's a group who wait a bit longer.
Just to clarify for anyone listening who may already know, and I apologize if I'm saying something you know, but we used a couple of acronyms there: DCD, and then there's DB, DCD, DBD. Yes. Who would anyone who would like to? Maybe you could do one each. But I believe DCD is a cardiac deaf donor, and then DBD is a brain deaf donor. The National Liver Offering Scheme, which we were talking about, where you have the transplant benefit score, that is only for the brain dead donors. The cardiac deaf donors are still done on a regional based allocation system, so that we kind of have two systems running in parallel in the UK at the moment. But there's more information about that on our website if people are interested in. Maybe we'll go via Keith, if you're okay, Keith. I'm going to bring you in again, and then maybe go back round. We had a question or a question about the best things people can do to stay fit and healthy before transplant comes upon, if you're put on the list, or even if you're not quite there and being put on the list, but what can you do to stay healthy? Did you have anything that you did, Keith, that you particularly did to try and keep as fit as you could?
Not particularly. I mean, I tried to keep moving. Some days I could have just stayed in bed all day, to be honest, but I forced myself to keep going. So I kept moving. In fact, I was losing so much weight that Leeds told me, they said, forget all about healthy eating. Eat whatever you want. Try and stop losing weight. So have as many cakes, as much chocolate as you can manage. Eat it all. It was the best diet I'd ever been put on. But unfortunately, I couldn't really stomach it. So I didn't take advantage of it. But no, I can't say I
There's a
did
missed
anything really.
opportunity there. That's
Yes,
like
it
being given
certainly was.
permission.
It's all
I
changed shortly after the transplant. When yeah, you know, it's a case of we'll just stop all that and healthy eating now. But
yeah,
yeah,
healthy eating definitely important. I was involved in a little clinical trial about prehabilitation. I think that's what it's called, prehabilitation. So I was prescribed like almost like being prescribed medication. I was prescribed exercises to do in a certain amount of getting out, and I have to say, for me it was amazing. Before I started doing it, I would, like you say, I could have stayed in bed all day. Getting up, getting downstairs was an achievement for me. And then through this exercise program that I had, I was able to start going out on daily walks, not very far, just to the corner shop and back, but I was getting out and about, which was very good. I think Katie's got some experience in that sort of prehabilitation world.
I think we probably both got quite a bit with that, because you know, there is emerging evidence, and there's a big trial going on in Birmingham and the Royal Free, the EXCELT trial, which is looking at the benefits of prehabilitation in liver transplant recipients. We've got a small program in the southwest that is quite early in its infancy, but you know, the benefits of exercise leading up to a major operation are, you know, it's without doubt. And there's been a lot of work done in the cancer surgery field looking at this, and there's no reason to think liver transplant is any different. And I think you really alluded to it very well there, Mark, in that not only are there the physical benefits, because what we see with patients with advanced liver disease is that they are often very malnourished and physically frail. And so the concentration on good nutritional input with high protein, low salt diets is important to not only maintain muscle mass, but try and regain some if people lose a lot, but also then the physical activity with, you know, they can be quite simple exercises, like you say, a short walk every day, some weight-based exercises can make a real impact. And you might not feel it in yourself that you're, you know, becoming massively physically fit, but it's stopping that deterioration while you're waiting that is key as well. But also, I think the mental impact of that, when you're really fatigued and utterly exhausted from the extent of your liver disease, you know, you cannot want to get out of bed for days, and the impact of that on your mental health, I think, is quite extreme, or can be quite extreme. And so just, you know, the achievement of a short walk every day, you've achieved something that day, you know, and the impact of that. And also, I think some of the benefits of some of the prehabilitation programs that are starting to come through is the peer support that's received from that. I mean, you guys obviously got your great support group with the PSC Trust, but equally, you know, talking to people at a similar stage of their disease, you know, the disease and transplant status, I think that is something that holds a great deal of significance to people, so it could be really helpful.
I remember the protein drinks I had to take, and they came in a variety of flavors, ranging from tolerable to awful is what I remember. If we start sort of thinking maybe a bit post-transplant now, one of the questions I wanted to touch on, Dr. Ferguson's probably very well placed for this, is what kind of medication should people expect to be on post-transplant? And is there any kind of difference in different versions of those medications?
So initially you're going to be on, and you'll remember this, a lot of medications. And then that rapidly changes at about the 3-month mark, quite a few stop. So the first set of medications will be medicines to stop rejection, and the main drug that we use across the UK is tacrolimus, and it might be, there are different forms of that: Prograf, Adaport, longer acting versions, Avograf. So, and different units choose different things, but that's really the mainstay of therapy. A lot of units will add in an antiproliferative agent like mycophenolate or azathioprine. And
what you said
anti-proliferative agent, yep. So mycophenolate or azathioprine. It's another drug again to prevent rejection.
Okay.
And we know that patients, and this is not something to fear, patients with PSC and the other autoimmune liver diseases are more prone to early acute rejection. But that is often easily treated. But we therefore are more careful about the rejection therapy we give. The other anti-rejection drug we give for the first 3 months, this is in Birmingham, is prednisolone, so it's a steroid, and that stops after 3 months, unless the patient has autoimmune hepatitis. And then there are other drugs, lots of other drugs to prevent other things happening. So we give some drugs in certain patients to prevent CMV reactivation or to control CMV. We give drugs to stop other infections. So cotrimoxazole stops PCP. We'll give drugs to stop fungal infections as well. We give antacids. So there's really quite a lot of drugs over that first 3 months, but then that quickly changes over that first year. Often patients are really only on their immunosuppressive therapy, and sometimes we drop the immunosuppressive therapy just down to one agent. Okay. But it's always personalized to the patient.
I think me and Keith are on slightly different formulations of the same drug. I think you mentioned, Keith, you're on a different one to me. But I've seen people talk online about having just one a day and stuff like that.
That's right. I mean, I started off on tacrolimus and azathioprine. Unfortunately, tacrolimus was affecting my kidneys, and after about 2 years after the transplant, the consultant said to me, "Well, basically, if things go on as they are, you're heading towards needing dialysis in a few years," which was the last thing that I wanted. And he said, "This is 21 years ago." Well, about 19 years ago. He said he was doing a trial himself on another drug called sirolimus, which was originally designed for use after kidney transplants. He said he was doing a trial to test his drug out for use after liver transplants. He said, do you want to go on the trial? He said it's far better for your kidneys because it was designed for use after a kidney transplant. So I went on the trial for that, and I stayed on it. It's been brilliant for me. Stopped my kidneys being affected anymore. I was taking off the azathioprine as well, because I was having a lot of headaches and sickness with that. As soon as I came off that, it all stopped. So the only drug that I'm on now, as far as my transplant's concerned, are 3 sirolimus tablets in the morning. And for me, they've hardly had any side effects at all. It's been fantastic. But I've been told that apparently about 50% of the people who they've tried on sirolimus just can't tolerate it. They get very bad side effects. But thankfully for me, it's been fine. The only side effect I had to start off with, I used to get a few spots on my face now and again. They'd come just for a week or so, then disappear. That'd be it for a few months, but I mean, that hasn't happened for a few years now. So
like being a teenager again every couple
exactly.
of months.
That's right. And there's no with this as well. It's not a case of having it. Is it now beforehand or 2 hours before food or 2 hours after food, like tacrolimus? With sirolimus, I was told just have them at the same time every day, either before food or after food. Just be consistent, and that's it.
So it sounds like the medications you get are quite personalised. Then it's sort of a regime that's worked out between you and the doctors and
right,
develops over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as Keith says, sadly, sirolimus hasn't really taken off and it's been very successful for Keith, obviously, but it hasn't really taken off as a commonly just prescribed drug because of side effects. So still the majority of people are on tacrolimus-based therapy long term.
Yeah, tacrolimus is what I'm on. The only side effects I had with it that I can remember is shaking. It's sometimes,
Yes.
which is very odd sometimes, and it still happens every now and then. I find I can't use a mouse on a computer
Yeah.
because it jiggles a bit. But
Yeah.
as side effects go, that's one I'm quite happy to live with. So
Yeah.
very.
Yeah, I used to get that bad when I was on tacrolimus, and I love photography and trying to take photos when you're shaking. Isn't
It's
very
just your
good.
style.
It's a case of using a very fast shutter speed. But thankfully, there's none of that with sirolimus.
That makes sense. Moving on. Sorry, Katie, did you want to jump in?
No, I think that's all been covered. That's fine.
So, carrying on talking about post-transplant, maybe Katie can take this one. Do you, and I think they vary from site to site, but do you have an idea of what restrictions are on people post-transplant, maybe food-wise or travel-wise or anything like that?
I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. The advice varies slightly from centre to centre, and I think that's largely because there isn't a massive evidence base behind some of what we advise post-transplant, and that's because it's a bit hard to do trials in people with such precious gifts that have been received, for example. But so we know that tacrolimus, for example, interacts with certain fruits, certain foods. So grapefruit, pomelo, Seville oranges are the most common. In recent years, there's been sort of case reports of lime, but I think that was like one. So I know some centres advise against having lime, but I think you'd need to have quite a bit of lime for that. And pomegranate, equally, you need lots of pomegranate for it to have a massive impact on the tacrolimus level. But I think the key is with those fruits is that they can give you toxic tacrolimus levels, and so it is really important to listen to the advice you're given. The other area where you have to be careful is thinking about unpasteurized foods. So your bries, your camemberts, Stiltons, things like that need to be avoided. But often as time goes on and the less immunosuppressed people are, they do find that they tolerate things a little bit better. So, for example, in the first 6 months, we'd advise only well-done steaks. But I think as time goes on, people generally sort of loosen up on that a little bit and perhaps have it medium. But
Talk to your doctors.
Exactly. The key is discuss it with your transplant team, really, and often it's about the balance of risks. So, but other than foods, thinking about getting back to exercise, that's really important for maintaining good cardiovascular health long term. And different centres will advise different things about foreign travel, for example. But it's not, it is perfectly okay. People can travel post-transplant. It's about having the right holiday insurance, picking the right destinations. And then finally thinking about work, I guess that's a really important thing for people post-transplant. Everyone will vary and it will often depend on the type of work people do, how quickly they're able to return to work and in which capacity. But I think that's an important thing to keep in people's minds, that it is possible to go back to work, and some people quite early. I've had people running their business from the hospital bed. Granted that quite an extreme, but often people are back to work at sort of 3 to 6 months, and I think that's a really positive thing for people to aim for.
From Keith's experience, how long did you take to go back to work? Did you go back to work? What happened with you, if you don't mind talking about it?
Yeah, well, I was working from home part of the time. I was my church's treasurer, so I was working from home. So I was doing that more or less as soon as I got home. And the other job, I'd retired from my main job a couple of years before all this happened. I managed to get a voluntary severance package, which was perfect timing as it turned out. So I wanted something completely different from what I had been doing. So I'd always been involved in admin type work. I had a part-time job for Boots the chemist, delivering medication for a couple of days a week. Margaret, my wife, worked in the dispensing section of Boots, dispensing medication for old people's homes and that. And I used to go out in the van and deliver them. The only thing was, in those days, we used to deliver oxygen cylinders as well, which were very heavy. And I was told I'd be all right after 6 months, there'd be no problem. But unfortunately, I ended up with a small hernia just before the 6 months. And Lee said, no, I think forget lifting. So that was ruled out. Eventually, I did go back after a while on the understanding that I didn't do any heavy lifting. But apart from that, I was working from home. So work wasn't too much of an issue for me. And thankfully, by then, I had my pension coming in from my early severance, because then you could be paid your pension at 50, not 55.
Wow.
But then the laws changed.
I'm going to keep stum on that, because that sounds amazing. I started just before 3 months had passed. I started at PSC Sport. I now, looking back, believe that was too early. It took a lot out of me to go back to work. I was working from home with a laptop, but like that sustained period of concentration and stuff really meant that the time I should have been resting, I was just sleeping. But so my advice to other people is when you feel like you want to go back, maybe give it a little bit longer, just because sometimes the mind is a bit further ahead than the body is. At least that would be my advice to people. Excellent. I'm going to turn to some questions that people are submitting now. I'm going to have to ask them and then read. So I'm going to be popping backwards and forwards. We've had a question, I saw it earlier, about live donors, and is that something we do in the UK? Is that something that's possible for people with PSC? That's probably a good question for Dr. Ferguson, is about living donors.
Yeah, we do have a living donor program in the UK. At the moment, not all centres provide it. So a few centres do provide it. And also, the thing to remember as well is often centres that have a children's program provide that when a parent donates to a child. But if your centre doesn't provide it, you can ask to be referred to a centre that does, and that's absolutely fine. And generally, most centres will say that that's an option and let you know. If they don't provide it, that they'll put you in contact with one that does. But there's a hope across the UK to increase access to living-related donation, because it's not been a huge part of what we do. It's a much bigger thing in different parts of the world, such as India and South Korea for cultural reasons, and India for other reasons.
That makes perfect sense. When I think there was a question, I haven't quite found it in my list. I'm scrolling up and down. It was something along the lines of, if you're considering a live donor and approaching people, do you need to be aware of blood type or anything like that? What are the matching characteristics? So
when someone asks about living-related donation, most places will have a coordinator who is part of that program, and they will go through all the characteristics they want to see. But it's a very detailed evaluation, as you can imagine, if someone is fit enough for that they have to go through. But the first step is just to see if there is someone who's willing to donate, and then they can go through all of those things.
Excellent, thank you. Katie mentioned this earlier when we were talking about the National Liver Offering Scheme. This question is probably a little bit politically charged, but I'm going to throw it to you anyway. Sorry. And it could be the answer is we don't know, but do we have any understanding as to why maybe the allocation scores for people with PSC aren't as good as other patients? Or is it even, I guess, related to the PSC part of that? Could it be another factor that's coming in?
I think the thing to remember about the national offering system is that it is based on a transplant benefit. Okay, so other offering systems look at need, and this is the UK version is about the benefit of the organ. So that includes donor characteristics as well, which many of the other offering systems don't. But I think part of the reason it's felt that the PSC patients don't score so highly is often they can be younger, and therefore we know that patients that are younger survive better on the waiting list. They're more robust, generally speaking. But also because it's looking at transplant outcomes, and we know there is a chance of PSC recurrence post-transplant. That is a factor in the benefit scoring system. I don't know if you wanted to go on from that, James.
So, I mean, it's complicated. I think one of the problems is the system is so complicated that it impairs scrutiny, is the first thing to say, because it is so complicated. As Katie says, there is a bias to patients who are older, because the data that they used, which was only 5-year outcome data, showed that people who are older with chronic liver disease, Katie was saying, were more likely to die on the waiting list, so therefore they get priority. But I would hope with the meeting that you went to, that hopefully changes will be made that should provide more equitable access for patients with PSC.
It's an evolving process at the moment, which is good. Just jumping back to, we were talking about live donors, and there's a couple of questions that popped up about them. I think there's something that patients feel it feels like something we can control a little bit. So I think something I explored anyway with my brother and my sister, basically trying to get them to give me parts of their liver, and neither of them did for various reasons, which was a bit rude. But but is there any difference between a live donor and a deceased donor in terms of effectiveness or usefulness for the patient? Yes, that's this question's been asked twice. Sorry, so I'm reading two places.
I mean, most of the data comes from other countries rather than our own, but the outcomes are excellent with living-related donation. Yeah.
I think
and obviously with Keith can attest to, very good with deceased donors as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the benefits of live donor, of course, is that you can plan, which you can't when you're on the waiting list. However, like James said earlier, it's a very, very involved process, the assessment process for live related donation, for a very good reason. It's a big operation for a potential donor to undertake. So I think that's why in the UK it hasn't been as widely used as in some other areas of the world.
I love the idea of being able to control when the surgery happens. I don't know, Keith, if you remember what time you got the call. Was it in the middle of the night?
Yeah, about 11:10 on a Sunday night. Yes.
Mine was 2:00 in the morning. I don't know if that's like a theme with transplants, but at least the people I've spoken to, it's always waking us up in the middle of the night.
Yes. Yeah, well, I got the call. They said, come over to Leeds as soon as you can. So my son, he drove Margaret and I over. And by about 1:30, he'd finished all the checks and such like. So they said, right, the transplant's definitely going ahead. Your family can come back at 7:00 in the morning, have an hour together till 8:00. Then 8:00, you're going off for surgery, and that was it.
Yes. How
amazing.
quickly it then happens is yeah.
That's right. But as I said before, the thing that staggered me was they'd only been told 4 days beforehand that there was no prospects in the foreseeable future of anything happening at all. And that yet on that Sunday night the phone went and they found a liver. Amazing.
Brilliant.
I'm still here.
We've had a few people ask about age relating to transplant. One of the questions was, is there an upper age, or is the chance of being added to the list, does it go down as you get older? If one of you would mind speaking on that.
I can start and Katie can go on. I mean, there is no doubt as you get older, it gets riskier. And therefore, as the risk increases, we have to be sensible, and we're dictated about making a good use of an organ. So we can't use in someone who's got a high likelihood of not getting through the operation. So often 70 is not a definite number, but if you're over 70, you have to be a very good 70-year-old to go through transplantation. So generally 70 is that kind of cutoff where but over 60 as well, definitely risk increases. So we do use age as a risk marker. But yeah, around 70 it starts to become pretty unusual unless you're very fit. Don't know what you think, Katie.
The same, and really it relates to, as everyone gets older, they develop more what we call comorbidities, so other disease processes. So you're more likely to have ischemic heart disease as you get older, or COPD, so other processes outside the liver that impact on your long-term survival, either with or without transplant. So that is where that sort of age figure comes in, really.
Excellent. We're coming to the end of our time, and there are so many questions that I've still not got to. Maybe we could try and quick fire a few of them with sort of shortish answers. There's a question here about alternatives, I guess would be a way of phrasing this, to transplant. Could liver resection be considered earlier in the disease's progression to promote regeneration and potentially avoid the need for a transplant?
No.
I was just thinking the quick answer is definitely absolutely not.
I'm guessing, is that because it's too complex, or there's no science behind it, or what would be the...
No, I mean, obviously PSC affects all of the liver. So by taking out a bit of the liver, you're putting that patient at huge risk because they've got disease in the remnant part of the liver, and they probably would go into liver failure.
Okay. It's good to know. That's good to know. I'm fairly sure this one is a no, but it's worth asking. Are there options for private health liver transplants?
No. I mean, you can have your care in a private ward or room in some centres, but essentially there isn't a private liver transplant programme.
I guess the only thing that is available, Katie, is if you had a donor and you went abroad and you paid for it. Some people have done that, haven't they? We do occasionally have patients who don't get listed for reasons, and they've gone abroad and got a transplant. So that does happen.
Another one here: could you be eligible for a transplant if you also have angina? So I guess that's about comorbidities with transplant. That might be straying into personal medical advice, maybe.
Well, ischemic heart disease is obviously a big risk factor for poor outcomes after liver transplant. So if someone did have ischemic heart disease, we'd need to make sure that it was well treated, well controlled if we're going to consider them for a transplant assessment. That
makes sense. Thank you. I'll do two more questions because we're right on the edge of our time. I had one here. This was a question we've been submitted. I'll read it as it was sent in. I think there's some misinformation in this, so I'll let you tackle that, which is, in the case of transplant, do I need to have a transplant again later? As I realize transplant is valid for 7 years maximum, and we have a 3 times max limit.
So that's a no.
Yeah. Katie, I'm sure gets this all the time. We get asked how long will a transplant last, and I get asked this a lot because I look after youngsters who've been transplanted when they've been babies and they transition. I'm sure you see them as well, Katie, and we don't know. We have some patients who their transplants lasted 40 years. Obviously, in PSC, the main concern is the PSC coming back. And so that helps, has an impact on that.
Recurrent PSC, I think off the top of my head, it's about 30% ish. Although I don't know if my figure in my head is up to date at all.
It's 20 to 30% at 5 years. I'd say probably close to 20%, but yeah, will develop recurrent PSC, and that certainly has an impact on the organ and how long it does well for. And some people, of course, need further transplants. There's another question, part of that question, wasn't there, about how many transplants can someone have?
Yes.
I mean, centres have done 4 transplants in patients, but that's very rare. And third transplants are unusual as well. And the risk just increases all the time. And particularly once you get up to 3 and 4, it starts becoming very high risk. And they can be difficult questions for an assessment team.
I think that's, I imagine, something you discuss with your team. They keep you informed and know what's going on.
Yeah.
Final question. If you're on a liver trial, for example, for one that removes fat from your liver prior to transplant, would that delay your operation?
Nope.
Any trial shouldn't impact on your treatment. It'd be fairly unusual for a patient listed for liver transplant to qualify for a clinical trial, because they're often excluded due to the extent of the liver disease. I'm not sure whether that pertains to a particular trial or not, but I
imagine, does it work conversely as well, as if you were on a clinical trial and then got added to the transplant list, your essentially participation in the trial would end?
Normally that's the case, I would say, most commonly, just because of the severity of the disease process. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what the trial is, isn't it? If Exalt, obviously, is a trial about prehab. But if you then, by going on the transplant list, you meet the exclusion criteria for that trial, then you would come off. Yeah, agree, Katie.
Excellent. There's still so many questions I would love to give to, but I'm going to have to end this now. People have got to go get food, feed themselves, relax. So I just want to say thank you very much to all 3 of you for joining me today, Katie and James, Dr. Ferguson and Keith. Thank you so much for giving up your time, for giving up your expertise, for telling your stories. I think it's really important when people tell their stories. I'm just going to do a bit of housekeeping type stuff. The next Ask the Expert webinar is this month. So we've got 2 in February. The next one is about the aspirin PSC trial called Ask PSC. It's going to cover the basics of PSC. What is PSC? It will also then cover the trial. What's the trial trying to do? How is it trying to do it? And there's also a patient who's involved in that trial going to talk about their experience of signing up, what they had to do. So you know sort of what, as a patient, if you're interested in that trial, what you'd have to do to be involved. That's going to be on Wednesday, the 26th of February at 7 p.m. You can find out more about the trial on our website. And then we do have an Ask the Expert almost arranged for March. That one's to be confirmed in the next couple of days. And then the April one you can already sign up for, which is about PSC, past, present, and future. Thank you to everyone who asked the questions. It really makes these sessions absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much to Martine, who's been in the background, answering questions by typing and just helping out and being wonderful. So again, thank you very much. This was the first time we've tried a more panel-based discussion. So when you do give your feedback, if you've got any comments about it, whether we should do more of it, whether we shouldn't do it again, whether I should just stop talking and let other people talk, put that all in the feedback and we will do that. But thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, you three, again, for making this a wonderful session. I'm going to click the end tab now, which will disconnect everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.